Welcome to Paranormal UK Radio, created by Iron Allen and Mark Johnson. Twin Souls is hosted by myself, along with my twin brother Ronald Kinsella, in association with the Paranormal UK Radio Network. A very warm welcome to all our listeners. And our guest tonight is David Bryant, author, astronomer, lecturer, guitarist and naval pilot. David featured on our last show, and this is the second part, where he's going to talk about his new book that's going to be released in a couple of days' time, The Conspiracy, How to Fool All of the People All of the Time, by David. And we're glad to have you on the show, David.
Oh, it's good to be here, Philip. Thank you.
Yeah, so I know that last time we spoke in a little length with regards to one of your books, Our Forbidden Moon. And obviously you've written Uninvited Companions and another great book, Danger from the Skies. So I just want to ask you, what compelled you to write The Conspiracy?
My background actually is in science, as you know, astronomy and biochemistry.
Yes.
And it's funny, the older I get, the more frustrated I become to see science kind of used or manipulated to basically as a tool of the, well, there's no other way of putting it really, the industrial, economic, political, sort of group.
Yes.
It's as simple as that. I just got frustrated the way that science was being politicised, and also that's also true of education too. So it was born out of frustration of those two things, really.
Yeah, because we know that, and I know that you've highlighted, I've had a look at the cover of the book, and I've always said myself that the conspiracy theorist, in my terminology, and I'm sure yours in this great book, because it deals with all of that, is that it's been designed to thwart the inquiring mind of the so-called conspiracy theorist. So can you highlight that?
It's a funny thing. In the first book, you were kind enough to mention the one about the moon conspiracy.
Yes.
I carefully don't use the word conspiracy at all in that book. And because the point is the word conspiracy itself has been hijacked. I don't know if you're aware, if you watch any TV documentary to do with anything, particularly to do with the UFO phenomenon, or the word conspiracy is dropped in there right, left and centre, and it's become a synonym for... well, you notice they always use comedians or very lightweight commentators, and so that's why the book's called The Conspiracy. It's not an accidental thing. The word conspiracy is deployed in order to kind of invalidate or to undermine the work that people like yourself and your brother are doing, really, I'm sure.
Yes, that's right. And obviously the most of the public, the good public, are able to smell a rat, and the argument is that not everything is a conspiracy, but where there are certain events within our history where the public are starting to raise their hands up in questioning, and you find that a lot of times that most of the good public, your good self included, because you're very academic and your mind is very much central to this type of formulation of how things work. It's like 9/11 or the Princess Diana's car crash. I know that with regards to that, there was another author called John King, who had apparently met a senior military official here in England, in Somerset, and the senior official told John King that someone from the stage of life was going to depart the scene, and it would travel all around the world. And I know that he wrote a book about this. But with regards to this new book that's coming out, that our listeners are going to learn about, what is, in your opinion, the most compelling conspiracy, and I'm sorry to use that word, but it's the only word that we can identify with the subject matter that we're talking about. What is the most compelling conspiracy within your eyes?
As far as I'm concerned, I should first of all say the book is actually out. It's been out for a couple of days now, and you can,
brilliant!
Without being really outrageously self-promoting here.
No, you go ahead. This is you've got to promote yourself.
Yeah, it's available on Amazon, and it's available on eBay, and it's available from my website, which is if you just type my name into Google, David Bryant conspiracies, it comes up straight away. I should just say, Philip, I never write anything with the expectation of making money. I mean, these days, I don't think many authors do. One of the things that first, I suppose, in a sense, encouraged me to write this book, and this is probably going to end up with me being in a wood in Berkshire somewhere, was the whole thing about the Second Gulf War and the weapons of mass destruction. And I thought the way that mankind, or the way that the English public were kind of railroaded into that, I began to think that the truth is an endangered species in the British media these days. And when Dr. Kelly was killed or died, ostensibly, I watched that, and I watched the apologists from the political party in charge of the country at the time, and I thought, they get away with this for the simple fact they just tag the word conspiracy on. Let's say conspiracy theorists see something sinister in the death of Dr. Kelly, and I thought, well, having looked into the thing in some detail, which I do go into in the book, you realise that we are routinely lied to for political and economic ends, and that's basically. But if you ask me what I think, and this is going to be extremely unpopular, but I think the biggest conspiracy of them all, if you want to use that word, is the global warming one.
Yes.
And the way that anybody, whether it's true or false, and I have, of course, it's fairly obvious from what I've just said that although I do see evidence of global warming, particularly, through my interest in natural history,
yes.
And changing patterns of migration, etc., etc., I cannot see, given my scientific background, I can't see that human beings are a major factor in global warming. And when you look and see the quality of some of the arguments that have been raised against anthropogenic global warming, and then what's happened to the people who've expressed those views, the way they've been marginalised, they've been ridiculed, they've been sacked and dismissed from very senior posts in academia and so on. Yes. It's just deplorable, really. In other words, as I said to you before, the truth has become an endangered species, and that's a classic way. If I can just take a minute to say something, I was very lucky in getting a extremely well-known, internationally known educational psychologist and philosopher to write the foreword of the book. And the reason he was so keen to do it, or was glad to do it, was, like me, he's seen the way that science has been subverted, and most reprehensibly in the way it's taught in schools. As your listeners will no doubt know, that I've been education, teaching, lecturing across every phase for 40-something years. I still lecture, in the colleges and universities extramurally, when I'm asked, which is less often these days. But I'll give you one classic example. Whether or not you and I believe that anybody's walked on the moon, yes, and I personally don't think they have. I was talking to a group of children. I may have mentioned this in the last talk, but it's so symptomatic. And I happened to say at one point, that in the group there might be children of men, of boys and girls who might get the chance to walk on the moon. Obviously, I don't say to in schools, I don't voice my concerns or disbelief about that. But and I said, at the moment, only 12 men have walked on the moon. At which point, one of the teachers put the hand up and said, "Sorry, did you just say somebody's walked on the moon?" And I said, "Well, yes, yeah." And he said, "No, I would have heard of that."
Good
and
Lord.
the teachers looked at each other, and the consensus, they hadn't heard of it. They were unaware of the Apollo moon landings. Now, this was every teacher in a Key Stage 1 school, teaching reception year 1 and year 2 children, and yet none of them were aware of the Apollo moon program.
Well, that's very interesting because, again, in regards to your book, The Conspiracy, what I'm getting from this is the fact that very slowly, very gently, through some form of very advanced form of brainwashing, they're trying to slowly eradicate that part out as the generations go forward.
Well, the thing is, it goes back to Karl Marx and beyond. If you want to control the population, you basically keep them frightened, you keep them ignorant, and you keep them drugged up. And every government around the globe has found that to be just the correct mixture. I look at the work of Noam Chomsky in the start of the book in reference to that, and there was no doubt at all that. I mean, again, this is going to be an extremely unpopular thing to say, particularly among your younger element in your audience. But don't forget, I've worked with in schools and in education for 40-something years, and I have seen at first hand the way that education has been, or standards in education have been eroded year on year on year. I used to be an examiner for the East Anglian Examination Board. In environmental science, strangely, and I can tell you now, I used to watch the way that grade curves were manipulated each year to produce the results the government expected, and that's even worse now. So I honestly do believe that in order to achieve a first degree in a science subject now, it's more or less the equivalent of an old A-level or S-level 30 years ago.
I see.
So what I'm suggesting is that if you keep the public sufficiently dumb,
yes.
you can convince them of anything. I mean, the facts about anthropogenic global warming just do not stand up to any. I mean, my brother, I'm not going to say his name on here, but he's reckoned to be probably one of the world's most credible and most knowledgeable organic chemists, and he runs 2 enormous chemical companies. He's got a triple PhD, one from Cambridge, one from Lyon in France, and one from Heidelberg. So he's not exactly stupid.
No.
He entirely agrees with me. He says, you've only got to look so many things to do with it's. Again, you'll be familiar with his work. A lot of what David Icke says, I find, even for my taste, slightly, too difficult or too extreme to take on board. But so much of what he says is absolutely true. This idea of, the basic theory that governments apply now is problem, reaction, solution, which you'd be well familiar with. Yeah. And
David. It's all right. David Icke. I remembered reading one of his books called The Robots' Rebellion, and that blew me away. And I think that a lot of good people. I mean, you're a scientist, and a lot of good people that come forward, who are brave enough to come forward to question the system now, clearly demonstrates that there is this and I will use the word conspiracy of silence. And I don't trust what I see on the news all the time, or I read in the newspapers. Not that I read that many now. And you know, it's so frightening. Do you remember the series many years ago called Blake's 7?
Absolutely.
And in that, the very opening, the very first episode, I mean, I love this series. I love Jacqueline Pierce, who was Supreme Commander Servo, and she played a fantastic part. But basically, she was a sexy woman. But basically, within the plot and the idea was that, you know, all these people, Blake was drugged up, and the whole of society was controlled by a higher system, a hierarchy, that kind of like, you know, tried to control people and kept them, you know, working. So in your opinion, David, when you talk about these the conspiracy, do you yourself believe that this information is being administered by higher echelons, way above the social pyramid of society?
You know, the thing is, Philip, when you look at the if I were to pick up the half a dozen things that I think are really indicative of this going on,
yeah,
I'd have to say 9/11, of course.
Yes.
I'd have to say the moon landings. I'd have to say the reasons for the Gulf Wars. I'd have to say global warming or anthropogenic global. And these things are come down to us from such a high level of government. Yeah. It can only be a part of government strategy. Yeah. But I'd go further than that. I've been married twice. My first wife was actually quite high up in the civil service, the Home Civil Service, and that gave me a real insight into the way the civil service works and how they think, and it's the really serious, you know, the high principal officers and permanent secretaries and things. Their attitude was, governments come and go every 4, 5, 6 years. Mm-hmm. So we won't bother to tell them anything, and they don't make any decisions. They just do what they're told to do by the Home Civil Service. And above and beyond that, you know, so you look at presidents, you know, and prime ministers. Really and truly, they respond to what they're told or encouraged to do by by people who they're anonymous, they're invisible, yes, they're unreported. You're looking at industrialists, you're looking at financiers, you're looking at high-ranking military officers. Yeah. You know, one of the things I learned when I was in the Navy was that, this is an appalling thing to say, but most people wouldn't believe this, but you know, the most high-ranking senior officers in the armed forces are desperate for war. Yeah, so it's strange to say, but you know, their attitude, it's like giving a kid a train set at Christmas and not letting them play with it or even take it out of the box. Yeah,
I agree. I totally agree with you there, David, on that aspect. But this conspiracy, I mean, what's really amazing is the fact that a lot more people are, I think, awakening to the fact that we are being systematically lied to. And one of the main huge areas of this type of deception, as I would call it, is through AOL on the news that you read on there. And I love the terminology dumbed down, because that's exactly what the system, as I call it, you may have a different word for it, but the system is intent in dumbing us down with all this negative news. And you just go on AOL Mail, for instance, and you know, there's advertisements like, how long have I got to live, and there's always pain and suffering, there's murder, destruction, there's a few little highlighted bits. So I totally understand that most people, vulnerable people, suck this up, and they feel in some way incapable of being able to solve these situations, and imprisoned because of their fear, the fear factor.
But it's worse than that, Philip, because if you have, and you know, obviously I'm not claiming to be a really high level academic, but I've got a couple of degrees in science, and
you're a smart man, David. Don't put yourself down.
I mean, there are a lot cleverer people than me, but the one thing I will say is, if I involve myself in discussion or debate with people, the world and his wife feels they're an expert on everything these days. But it's superficial, it's absolutely, and therefore it's extremely easy to pull the wool over people's eyes,
Yeah.
And the other thing is, it's really, really, I find quite sinister, is that people are not analytical. They're not trained any longer to think analytically, to sort through the evidence and set aside that which is unreliable and focus on that. Can I just say, I think a really interesting thing, I think Princess Diana died because a Frenchman got overexcited and drove too fast at night in a fast car through a tunnel. But when you get to, all that aside,
yeah,
and the bit that is never mentioned, is never examined and never analysed or never presented before the public, is much, much, much more sinister than that. The fact that the car crashes, just before 12:30 at night, into the tunnel, in the Pont de l'Alma tunnel.
Yeah.
The first person on the scene happens to be a doctor. Okay.
Yeah.
Who examines the body, examines the car, sees that the driver and Dodi Alfredo are dead. But then realises that the Trevor Reese, the bodyguard, and Princess Diana are still alive. Not only is she alive, she's conscious and talking.
Yes.
And you're supposed to believe he didn't recognise her. And she's an hour afterwards, she's finally placed in an ambulance to be driven to the hospital. The hospital is literally 10 minutes away.
Yes.
En route, the ambulance stopped so that she could be given adrenaline. She finally arrived at the hospital an hour and 3/4 after the accident. Now, even that, there's so ridiculous. We are told that as a result of the autopsy, which has never been made public, but we're told that she had a fist-sized tear in her pulmonary vein. Okay, That's fine, except that some very, very a surgeon in America, in fact, called Dr. John Oxner, he stated that a wound the size that was reported would have killed her immediately.
Yes, that's right. I was just thinking that myself.
Exsanguinated within seconds.
Yes.
But the fact that we're supposed to believe that she survived an hour and 3/4 travelling at 30 miles an hour,
Yes, and that
3 miles from there. Now, none of that is ever reported. They instead of which, this conspiracy thing, they focus on the bits which are risible, that just don't stand up to, the idea of SAS people on the back of motorbikes with strobe lights. In other words, they turn the thing into a Bond movie.
Yes.
So they ridicule it, and that's basically what you're relying on, is the fact that people are too, basically these days, they're kept ignorant. I mean, it's a... Have I got time to get another? Has this affected me? No, not really. This, if you like, this conspiracy, but it has touched me in one way, which is after I gave up full-time teaching some years ago, or a long time ago actually.
Yes.
I still got called because I have a reputation of being good with difficult children, or good at teaching science, making it accessible to people who are kind of struggling with it. But I got called into some big high schools and stuff, and in one of them, at one point, the head of science asked me if I would take the children to the cinema, a group of about 90 kids, to see, and these were year 10 children, to see Al Gore's film, An Inconvenient Truth. And I said, no, I won't do that. And he said, what do you mean you won't do that? I said, well, I won't do it because even in America, that film has been the subject of litigation and examined, and it's been discovered that many of the important elements of the film were either exaggerated or just made up. I said, it's not our business as educationalists to be involved in that, and you can, and I went through this, and you can guess what happened. The phone stopped ringing. It's illegal to show that film in America. to children, because it's more about indoctrination than it is about education.
Yes.
And with many of the central points have been, the famous bit with the drowned polar bears and.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I suppose that's where I got kind of frustrated, Philip, is the fact that it's so easy to show people images and pictures out of context, which is what the media seem to be very keen to do.
Yeah.
And then if you take the case of people like, I don't know, great, that's Dr. David Bellamy,
God love him.
Yeah. Chance comment on Blue Peter ended his career in the media.
Yes.
It's incredible. He was labelled as a global warming denier. So I always look at these things and say, sure, you've got to find the reason for these. It's the old crime scene thing, means, motive,
yes,
opportunity, and then you look and see who's behind this, who's behind these cover-ups, this misinformation, disinformation, and the book I suggest the reasons for this, right the way to. I know you might find this strange, right the way through to things like, did Hitler survive World War II?
Well, that is a very interesting speculation, because I am under the firm conviction that Hitler actually got away, and I know that most people say, oh, there they go, look, they're going on. But I saw a very interesting documentary on one of this. I can't remember what channel it was. I'm sorry, the actual program escapes me, but it was a very well done documentary about Hitler having taken flight, and some witnesses seeing him, or he would completely cover his identity as well. And going back also, David, to what you were saying about people speaking out and ending their careers. Noel Edmondson is one of the people here in England who has spoken out, hasn't he, quite a few times, and he's now finding himself at the backlash of the media. And in response also to the media is that if you're not playing their game, then they will either destroy you or discredit you in some way, so that you're not able to get back into the race, as it were.
Yeah, absolutely. It's. I suppose that the point is, we live in a very and a world that where people deal in immediacy. It's a very shallow existence. I don't mean that as a criticism, but we live in a world where
I agree with you.
Where there's again, don't get the idea I'm sorry, any kind of conventional religious beliefs, because I don't, but we live in a world where religious spirituality, where deep thought, where any kind of reflection, people don't have time for any of that. I honestly believe that we're in a world where everybody is judged. Well, we're moving towards a world where everybody's judged by possessions and by position, and we look at a society. Of course, it's particularly poignant for me because I am 67, but we're living in a world where old people, their experience, their knowledge is basically dismissed. And it's very, very easy to do,
Well, I find that a lot of my peers I respect, like yourself and many other people, I look up to, because I feel that a lot of the, I wouldn't say older generation, that's a little bit awful to use, but my peers I totally respect. And, it's very interesting, David, you mentioning about, people being dumbed down and not really interested in things. I'm reading a biography on Colin Wilson. I'm sure you're aware of the author.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I've got a book on him, and he's basically has very much the same idea. He had very much the same ideas as you had, frustrated by the world, and simply because the way that he saw the world is like basically most people are like on a wheel going round and round, and he was wanting to get out of that box. And with your good self and your brilliant books, you can tell by a researcher, lecturer, author, through their writings and through their their works, just how passionate that you and they are. So it's really interesting that scientists and learned men come forward with these radical ideas that have great truths in them, and I believe that more people now are stopping and saying, hang on a minute, there's something not right here. And I do know, also going back to the 9/11 incident, there's another chap that I know that was absolutely, I wouldn't say obsessed with it, but in the very beginning, in the inception of when this all started happening, he told me that a lot of the news media had changed when the story first broke to what was actually relayed to the general public afterwards. So I know that we're stepping on a few eggshells here, because people have their own beliefs, and I would never interfere with that. But certainly one of them is 9/11, and I've heard this so many times where people have said, hang on a minute, that's not what I saw. I saw something else. I think there was another program where there was a woman in Australia, I believe, who was watching the first moon landing, and she actually witnessed a Coke bottle that she'd seen on the moon, and then when she'd seen a repeat of this many years later, of course they didn't have recording devices like DVDs or VHS then, she'd seen it and said they've admitted it's been omitted out, but she actually saw another transmission soon afterwards and said it's gone. So
the thing about all this, and that's, I know it's a bit of a corny film, but if you look at what's the film JFK, Kevin Costner's character makes a very good point that all this has become a generational thing now. As he says, he wouldn't live long enough to actually see all the data on the Kennedy assassination released, but he's passed on the information to his son in the hope that he'll be alive when it is, and that's also true of 9/11. It's true of when you look at the moon landing, which obviously is, I've lost so many friends and colleagues through that, purely because of. But when you look at it, the central characters. We lost John Young quite recently. The Apollo 16 commander, and probably my favourite astronaut. Very, very soon there'll be nobody around who, that's a fascinating thing, Philip, on the telly the other day. It was nothing to do with any of this. It was a program about murder, and they had all these forensic psychologists on there.
Right.
And they were looking at a video of recent murderers, the case where children had allegedly disappeared or been abducted, and it turned out that their parents or relatives had actually killed them or abducted them. And they said, if only they'd asked us, we could have told them. And they went through all the signs that you can detect.
Yes.
In somebody who's lying or manipulating the truth, and it was incredible. And not the least because 90% of the things that were pointed out as being indicative of lying, if you apply those, we'll say, to the Apollo 11 astronauts at their famous news conference, you can tell that they're lying to the thief. I'm just surprised that that's rarely pointed out. And then you realise the reason it's not pointed out is because people basically believe what they're told. And it's very, very hard to undermine that. And fundamentally, Philip, who are you and who am I? Nobody. In the minds of the public, we're nothing. And I'd love to believe what you said earlier on, that that there is an increasing number of people who. But I think I said to you in the last programme, and I make no apologies for this. I've been studying the UFO phenomenon, which is something I'm very, very interested in.
Yes.
And I actually first heard of the Rendlesham thing I'm not joking, within literally hours.
Wow.
For real, I'm not going to tell you how or why on here at the moment. It's because the person involved doesn't want it broadcast. But just say he was a radar operator in East Anglia, and he told me about it within hours of it happening. Now, but when you look at the UFO phenomenon, it's just so easy for people to be dismissive of it. To people,
Yes.
And the reason it's so easy, and this is the bit you're not going to like, some people won't like, I don't think you'll object to it. In my 60 years of experience and studying it and reading it and rehearsing and researching, I've discovered there are three groups within the UFO phenomenon. Mm-hmm. There are people who have had a genuine experience themselves, or know somebody who has, who are looking for some form of resolution or some explanation that they can live with, okay? And then there's a group who are making money by writing books and doing public appearances all over the States.
Definitely, yeah. Totally.
And they're in a sense, I've got no problem with that. A good friend of mine is, as you know, is John Hanson, who writes the
brilliant Most Haunted series. Yeah.
I mean, I'll tell you this now, he's made nothing from that series of books, but he's devoted his life to doing it. But, I wouldn't begrudge it if he made a few quid, but he won't. But the last group are complete lunatics.
Yes, absolutely.
There are cultists, people to whom it's a religion, people. And unfortunately, they pervade the whole thing, and it's so easy for the media to pick on those and their prognostications, and when they wrap their heads up in silver foil and put a coat hanger up their nose. But the point is, I've spent ages talking to some serious people, senior military officers, politicians, astronauts, and you mentioned that to somebody. Oh yeah, I've spoken to 8 Apollo astronauts, about this, including, and then they look at you and say, oh yeah, whatever, and it cuts absolutely no ice, because that's the way people function these days. They'll, I could talk to you, and I'd love to talk to you for hours and hours and hours about something. The easiest thing is to read my ramblings in the book, really, but I was watching a documentary the other day about Gary McKinnon,
Oh yes. He's hacked into the American military database systems and saw what he believed to be a UFO and a list of non-terrestrial officers, I believe it was.
Well, I think the most significant thing to me is the way into any secret or sensitive data is through the back door. Instead of trying to think find he went in through the accounts department of NASA, which is the way to do it. Find the salary roll, which includes non-terrestrial officers. Now, as somebody who's studied manned spaceflight right from the very start.
Yes.
I mean, have you heard of something called the Manned Orbital Laboratory Program?
No, I'm very honest. I haven't heard of that, David.
Oh, I mean, it's often said that the American space program that we see is actually just a very, very shallow mirror of what's really going on.
Oh yes, I understand that part. Yeah.
I think we discussed Philip Corso last time.
Yes.
The famous quote that Reagan once said that with the shuttle, we now have the capacity with the shuttle and our facilities at Vandenberg to put hundreds of astronauts in orbit at once. Now, I was so surprised nobody picked up on that.
Well, he also said he also said, didn't he, that we would all join together if we learned there was a threat from outer space.
It's so easy to dismiss him as a sort of semi-senile ex-actor, but honestly, I'm told from the highest levels from an astronaut. Again, I don't think he'd thank me for telling you this, but he happened to be at a briefing at the White House when they were watching, believe it or not, of all things, Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Oh, God.
And at one point, Reagan turned round, and I'm sure this can be validated by other people, but this astronaut told me about it, turned round to, I can't think of the name of the producer of the film now, but, the guy who made those films. Spielberg. He turned around and said, there are only 1 or 2 people in the room who know the truth of what you've presented here, Mr. Spielberg.
You do his voice fantastic.
Well, he wasn't joking. He was serious about it.
Yeah.
It was actually, To me, in other words, once you realise, as you do with your research, you and your brother, the research you do, the people you speak to, that we only allowed to access a tiny tip of the data on anything, and then it's massaged, it's made palatable for basically a kind of very docile public, you know.
Yeah.
I was looking at the houses they're building in Norfolk, where I live, and they're saying, "Oh, we need houses. We need to build houses for young people, for starters and things." You know, all in the entire area of East Norfolk where I live, they're building loads and loads of houses. The cheapest house you'll find is £500,000.
Good Lord. That's ridiculous.
And they're building thousands of them.
Wow.
And of course, it's got nothing to do with housing for young people. It's got a lot more to do with making money for property developers.
Yeah, absolutely.
So in other words, you can ameliorate anything, you can dress anything up, you know, you can make it acceptable. You can say that, the driver of a car was drunk and that's why he crashed into a pillar, or you can say that. You can say that an astronaut is Alzheimer. I don't know if you know this. In almost the first chapter of John Young's autobiography about his trip to the moon, he says how glad he was to see the 3 pads of the lunar module touch down on the moon's surface, while the lunar module had 4 pads. And there are lots of other examples, and you think, is the guy dropping us a few hints, like the Coke bottle you referred to?
Yes. That's his, yeah.
So that's what I've tried to point out in the book. People might say, well, you've been kind of superficial. You've jumped from one thing to another. You've done David Kelly, you've done 9/11, you've done Princess Diana, you've done Did Hitler Survive? The reason I wanted to try, I've done chemtrails even, God help
Oh,
us.
yes.
What I've tried to do here is find something that any reader with any background can pick up on and say, do you know what, that interests me.
Yes.
I'm interested about 9/11, I'm not interested about the moon, but I'm interested in knowing why it is I can go out for a walk first thing in the morning, the sky is beautifully clear and eggshell blue, and then one after another these planes go over and the contrails join up, and then we have 8 octaves of cloud, and then it starts to rain, you know, and so on and so forth. So that what I've tried to do in this book and all the other books is just find something for everybody. It's like the old. You remember the old weekend assortment of candies that your grandma used to buy you for Christmas?
Yes, I remember those.
I tried to do that really, and I've been very, very fortunate in the people who've bought the books, and a lot of people have bought the moon landing one, which I'm very pleased about.
Yes.
And also the one about the orbs and psychic phenomena. You know, it was my attempt at a unified field theory of the paranormal. That's the second one.
The uninvited companions.
Yeah.
That's the one there, yes.
Yeah, and that, you know, I just hope some people, you know, with an interest in the paranormal will read it and say, oh, crikey, I hadn't really thought of that. So some people have been kind enough to describe me as a Renaissance thinker. In other words, you know, my brother's a pure biochemist, okay? Although he has got a great interest in archaeology as well. I know other people are fantastic IT specialists. I know other people who know everything there is to know about photography. But you have to go back to people like Isaac Newton to find people, or other Renaissance figures. You have to go back that far to find people who try to understand as much as they can of every discipline. And by doing that, Philip, you can make the links, can't you? Intellectuals.
Yes.
And you can, to my way of thinking, it's the only way you can peel back the layers of disinformation and see what's actually lies behind it all.
Yes, I mean, I remembered the David Kelly case because I saw that, and I've got no way of proving this, but a little bit of doubt came into my mind when this started coming out with regards to that poor man's passing, and I always knew deep within the recesses of my mind that there was something not right with it. And the same with a 9/11. and the same with Princess Diana's tragic passing. But what's wonderful, David, is that, you know, through your research and through your books and through your brilliant mind, you're giving people the chance to look at this. And what I love about your books as well is that they're no nonsense, they're black and white. What you're not telling the reader what to believe. You're asking the reader to go look at it for yourself, go and find it out for yourself, because that's the only way that someone starts to build up a framework of events that we're being told did happen but really didn't. And I know that unfortunately some of these cases like Roswell are so steeped in mythology now that it's a really dead and buried case. But what is fascinating is the hundreds and hundreds of people that were involved in just that one incident. And as you briefly mentioned earlier, and we did mention him in the last program, Colonel Philip Corso, brilliant mind, actually had this type of pieces of the technology that was given to him for him to then pass on to other scientific corps that weren't to know where they came from, but see how they could integrate them into into society. So I really,
I mean, I just want to say this.
Yeah.
People so easy to dismiss Corso as people, believe it or not, do with Colonel Holt and Captain Salas and people, other military officers. They're just trying to make a few quid. But when you look at Corso, what people tend to forget or are unaware of is a guy actually did work at the Pentagon in a department involved in back engineering of Soviet and Chinese equipment. So he was, if you like, in the go-to department that would have been involved in this kind. And so that's how he came across the fact that some of what was being back engineered wasn't even terrestrial.
No, that's right. Very highly decorated and very, very smart man.
That's, I think, what probably annoys people like yourself and myself more than anything, is the way these wonderful people are hung up to dry by the media, basically.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I can assure you of one thing, David. We are not going to hang you out and dry by any means, because I'm sure our listeners will be really eager to go out and buy the Conspiracy, How to Fool All of the People, All of the Time, by David Bryant.
Most of the people, most of the time.
I've got it on here that's showing me that but it looks an absolutely fantastic book, and also your other books as well, An Invited Companions, Our Forbidden Moon, Danger from the Skies. I mean, do you have any plans to write any more, David? Have you got any more plans to write any more books?
I've got about another 3, really, but I'm not going to pretend for 1 minute that it's not distressing to write the things, then not to sell them. So I'm very gratified. Thank you very much for the opportunity you've given me to give them a shameless plug on here. And I will tell you this. I'll tell you this, Philip. The sales in America of the Apollo Moon Conspiracy book are. That one has actually, The Forbidden Moon, the sales that have gone right up since your broadcast.
Oh, bless your heart. Well, we're here to help everyone. Right. And I'd like to point out for the record, for all those listeners, and I know that I've been under attack for this as well, that we're in it for the money. I'd just like to remind those people that have addressed this point that authors make very little money, and that the main goal is the passion and drive to bring out what they believe and what they want to say, and so all the sales do help. It makes me laugh. I've always said, David, that no one complains that a footballer who kicks a ball around makes millions of pounds, and no one raises an eyebrow. But as soon as a researcher who spent many years within their field, yourself as well as a scientist, and also an author and a lecturer, and you've done so much, and that as soon as you start doing something like this, other people say, oh, they're just in it for the money? Well, I can assure you very much, and all our listeners, that is very much not the case.
I'd have to sell thousands and thousands more books to break even. Honestly, I would, because it's a very expensive process. I mean, even just buying the ISDN numbers, ISBN numbers.
Yeah, so, well, David, we're coming to the end of the programme, and I want to thank you very much, David, for coming on board and for the 2 programmes, because it's a 2-parter, and speaking about your thoughts and about your research and about your colourful career. And also to remind the listeners once again, please, I'm sure that you'd really find the Conspiracy a really interesting read. Go out, buy it, make up your own minds, but I'm sure that you won't be disappointed. And the other book, Our Forbidden Moon, is an amazing piece of work, because David has actually dealt with many of the moonwalkers and astronauts. And I think you'll find that book very revealing within its content. So, is there? Can you tell us, David, how the good public can check out your work again? Any sites that you have or you've got going?
I mean, the easiest way is I have a website where from which the books are available. Okay, and that's. If you just type davidbryant.co.uk into Google, or from I've also had a website to do with the paranormal it's the oldest continually running one on the internet.
Oh, wow.
Actually, which is called Chilling Tales UK. And that's been running since 1998, and that's got lots of interesting stuff on there. I mean, it's just my rambling diatribes, obviously, but you can get them on there, and they're available on eBay, on Amazon. Again, just type my name in, or the name of the book. But it's very kind of you. I mean, it's kind of you to allow me to mention that. But I just want to. If I could just say to you, I hope your listeners all realise this is totally unscripted. So if I'm seem to be a bit of a rambling buffoon, it's because it's kind of train of consciousness, isn't it, Philip?
Yes, well, it's natural. I wouldn't want anything to be scripted, and all the listeners prefer it, but people are themselves. And you know what? It's not like in the 1950s or 40s where everyone had to speak very properly and not make a mistake. We're just being as we are, and I think that's the best way, and it shows all of not just people but our listeners as well too, just how human we really are, and how excited and interested that we are within our fields of research. So thank you very much, David, for coming on board. Real pleasure to have you. I'm sure that hopefully in the future we'll have you on again. This is an opportunity for me to thank all of our listeners who tune in to Twin Souls. We're very, very grateful to you for that. And you've been listening to the Paranormal UK Radio Network. Thank you very much again, David, and to our listeners. And tune in next month, and we'll have some more good stories for you, and researchers and authors and the like. God bless and stay safe. Thank you to David Bryant, and just to let our listeners know that Philip and I received a copy of his book through the post from him. Thank you very much, David, and it's absolutely gorgeous. On that note, Philip has also written a book, a beautiful book called A Passage Through Eternity, which is autobiographical and which deals with the avenues of the aliens and also the supernatural. Also, Philip and I decided to re-release several of our children's books, which were previously published by companies in the early 2000s. One of them is called The Rock Bottom Twins. Now, they are illustrated with our original pen and ink
drawings in. And the second one of that, the Rock Bottom Twins and the Nakabati Mission, concerning their mechanical elephant they build, the twin brothers, that is a combination digital and traditional drawings. What we've done as a little treat for you is we've composed a small audio narrative of this story, and this part is when Boogle and Buff Kingsmillion, the bumbling identical twin brothers who are 60 years old, by the way, they arrive in the Congo with Trunkaflunk, the newly designed and created robot elephant, and they've asked him to test out his weapons, his laser weapons, and because they're going to be needing them when they travel into this horrendous place. Targeting a cluster of trees some way off, the elephant's eyes quickly turned a ghastly red, appearing almost bloodshot. They intensified so rapidly, he appeared demonic. When enough energy had been amassed within them, they sent out a blinding pair of scarlet beams which shot forth towards the target. A searing blast engulfed the trees, and for a split second, night turned into day. Boogle blew a kiss at the elephant while Buff scratched his bottom. "You are perfect," Boogle piped up. "A labour of love." However, Trunkaflunk was not happy because, amid the crackling of foliage and fire, he could see shapes frantically running away. Using his super-sensitive ears, he could also pick up their sounds.
"We've got company. People are running from the explosion. They were hiding in the trees, obviously watching us. I think I have just vaporized a few of them by accident."
"People?" Boogle gasped. "You mean a tribe of some sort?"
Sifting through the catalogue of internet information you so kindly downloaded into my vast memory banks, I regret to inform you that I have established that the people are a tribe of sorts. I was able to study one of the primitives shortly before it darted away.
"The Nakabati tribe?" Buff inquired, hopeful. "Is that what you're saying?"
This tribe does have a name, but they are not that. They are cannibals, man-eaters.